Good day everyone. We are the group 6 and our topic is about social learning theory by Albert Bandura. So, what is social learning theory? Social learning theory proposed by Albert Bandura emphasizes the importance of observing, modeling, and imitating the behaviors, attitudes, and emotional reactions of others. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. So, social learning theory is a theory of learning process and social behavior which proposes that new behaviors can be acquired by observing and imitating others. In social learning theory, Albert Bandura in 1977 agrees with the behaviorist learning theories of classical conditioning and operant conditioning. However, he adds two important ideas. First is the mediating processes occur between stimuli and responses. The mediational, for example, is the mental. The event could be memory, perception, attention, or problem solving, and etc. These are known as mediational processes because they mediate. Example is go and between. Between the stimulus and the response. They come after the stimulus and before the response. The second one is behavior is learned from the environment through the process of observational learning. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. Mediating processes occur between stimuli and responses. Behavior is learned from the environment through the processes of observational learning. Observational learning. Children observe the people around them behaving in various ways. This is illustrated during the famous Bobodal experiment by Bandura in 1961. By the way, the Bobodal experiment is the collective name for a series of experiments performed by Albert Bandura, which is psychologist, to test his social learning theory. Between 1961 and 1963, he studied the behavior of children after they watched an adult model act aggressively towards a bubudal. Individuals that are observed are called models. In society, children are surrounded by many influential models such as parents within the family, characters on children's TV, friends within their peer group, and teachers at school. Ang mga kabataan or ang mga bata is napalibot sa mga influential models like parents or kanang mga amigo or kanang maestra sa eskwelahan. Children pay attention to some of these people or models and encode their behavior. At a later time, they imitate the behavior they have observed. The children is kanang ilang timan-an kung sa ilang nakit-an sa uban din like murag ilahang masundog unsa ilang naobserbahan sa ilang napalibot nga mga models or the people around them. So next is, there are a number of processes that make it more likely that a child will reproduce the behavior that is society deems appropriate for its gender. So first is the child is more likely to attend to and imitate those people it perceives as similar to itself. Consequently, it is more likely to imitate behavior modeled by people of the same gender. Second, the people around the child will respond to the behavior it imitates with either reinforcement or punishment. If a child imitates a model's behavior and the consequences are rewarding, the child is likely to continue performing the behavior. So the next slide will be tackle of Mr. Jeffrey Redondo.
So I will continue the reporting. Reinforcement can be external or internal and can be positive or negative. So ang reinforcement pwede mahimong external, pwede sad internal. Dayon, it can be positive or negative. If a child wants approval from parents or peers, this approval is an external reinforcement. But feeling happy about being approved of is an internal reinforcement. So kanang kung ang child kay ngayo pa og approval sa iyang parents or iyang mga amigo, gitawag ni siya nga external reinforcement. So kung giaprubahan na ka, dayon nag feeling happy ka kayo, mo na gitawag nga internal reinforcement. A child will behave in a way which it believes will earn approval because it desires approval. Positive or negative reinforcement will have a little impact if the reinforcement offered externally does not match with an individual's needs. So kaning positive or negative reinforcement kay makahatag og gamay nga impact if the reinforcement kanang gihatag nga externally kay dili sakto sa or dili match sa needs sa isa ka individual or person. Reinforcement can be positive or negative. But the important factor is that it will usually lead to change in a person's behavior. So, mula gito kanang ang reinforcement pwede ma-positive or negative, pero ang importante makahatag ni siya og kanang lead nga maka-change sa behavior sa isa ka person. So, next slide. Third, the child will also take into account of what happens to other people when deciding whether or not to copy someone's action. So, isod ko ni sa hunahuna sa bata no nga unsay nahitabo sa isa ka person sa iyang decision making kung angay ba niyang buhaton ang gihimo sa isa ka person. So, sa pag-obserbara sa consequences nga sa other person, maka-learn siya. The example of this is the younger sister observing an older sister being rewarded for a particular behavior is more likely to repeat the behavior itself. So, kanang nakaigsuon nga mas dako pa nimo or imong older brother, kanang mag-observera ka siya dyan makabantay nga ang iyang behavior kay gi-rewardan. So, tendency ani nga imong awaton yang behavior kay para ma-rewardan pug ka. So this is known as vicarious reinforcement. So next slide. Identification occurs with another person, the model, and involves taking on or adopting observed behaviors, values, beliefs, and attitudes of the person with whom you are identifying. So kanang identification kanang kuan ka ga imong adapon ang imong gi-observe nga behavior, values, beliefs, and attitude sa isa ka person. Imong i-adapt sa imong pag-identify ani imong adapon. The term identification as used by social learning theory is similar to the Freudian term related to Oedipus complex. So, nakuno sila kanang similarity. However, during the Oedipus complex, the child can only identify with the same sex parent. Whereas, with social learning theory, the person, child or adult, can potentially identify with any other person. So, not din sila gyapon kalahian. Ay ang Oedipus complex, kanang ang isa ka bata maka-identify ra sa yang same-sex parents or yang family. Then ang social learning theory, the person kay maka-identify og bisag kinsa nga tawo. So mo to ilang kalahian. Next. Identification is different to imitation as it may involve a number of behaviors being adapted, whereas imitation usually involves copying a single behavior. So, ang kalainan na nila kay adapting o copying. Kay ang identification, maka imong adapon ang daghan nga behavior sa isa ka person imong model. Kang dayon ang imitation, imong copyon ang single behavior. So, single ra nga behavior imong copyon mo na kalainan sa identification of imitation. So, that's for my report. Then, the next reporter will continue.
So, thank you, Mr. Redondo, and I am Jovelyn Inlacaya, and I am here to report about the mediational process from Albert Bandura. So, social learning theory is often described as the bridge between traditional learning theory or behaviorism and the cognitive approach. This is because it focuses on how mental or cognitive factors are involved in learning. So unlike Skinner was the early behaviorist theorist, and he believes that behaviorism does not study or feature internal thought processes, but the environment alone determines behavior. So in contrast to Skinner, Bandura believes that humans are active information processors and think about the relationship between their behavior and its consequences. So, observational learning could not occur unless cognitive processes were at work. It is because ang cognitive processes is the one who will help the students to use their brains effectively. So, ang cognitive processes mo ang mutabang sa mga estudyante nga gamiton ang ilang hunahuna effectively. So, through cognitive processes, students will fully engage in the learning process for learning, thinking, and remembering get easier. So, dapat yun nga mas mauna ang cognitive learning kaysa observational learning. These mental factors also mediate or intervene in the learning process to determine whether a new response is acquired or not. So therefore, individuals do not automatically observe the behavior of a model and imitate it. So there is some thought prior to imitation, and this consideration is called mediational processes. So the mediational processes are mental or cognitive factors that intervene in the learning process to determine whether a new behavior is acquired or not, and it occurs between observing the behavior or stimulus and imitating it or not, or response. So there are two approaches in mediational process, and these are behaviorist model and cognitive model. So behaviorist model only study observable or external behavior, and it focuses that idea idea that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment. So it states that behaviors are learned from the environment or in the external behavior. So the behaviorist approach only studies external observable, no? So they believe that internal behavior cannot be studied because we cannot see what happens in a person's mind. And so dili jud ni ma-measure nato kay umanta kay baw sa mga huna-huna sa mga tao. So in comparison sa compared to the behaviors model, ang cognitive model believes that internal mental behavior can be scientifically studied using experiments. So, cognitive psychology assumes that a mediational process occurs between a stimulus or input and response or output. So, the mediational or mental event could be memory, perception, attention, or problem solving, etc. These are known as mediational processes because they mediate or go between the stimulus and the response. So they come after the stimulus and before the response. Therefore, cognitive psychologists say if you want to understand behavior, you have to understand these mediational processes. So we all know that we observe a lot of things around us, but we don't actually learn everything that we observe. So there are some factors that naturally influence our social learning or factors that ensure success in learning. So what are these factors? These are the four mediational processes proposed by Bandura, which are attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. So when we say attention, it is the individual's needs to pay attention to the behavior and its consequences and from a mental representation of the behavior. So for a behavior to be imitated, it has to grab our attention. We observe many observe behaviors on a daily basis, and many of these are not noteworthy. So attention is therefore extremely important whether a behavior influences others imitating it or whether we notice the behavior. So second is retention. So when we say retention, it is how well the behavior is remembered. The behavior may be noticed, but it is not always remembered, which obviously prevents imitation. It is important, therefore, that a memory of the behavior is formed to be performed later by the observer. So much of social learning is not immediate. So this process is especially vital in those cases. Even if the behavior is reproduced shortly after seeing it, there needs to be a memory to refer to. So the third is reproduction. This is the ability to perform the behavior that the model has just demonstrated. We see much behavior on a daily basis, but we would like to be able to imitate that, but that is not always possible. So we are limited by our physical ability, and for that reason, even if we wish to reproduce the behavior, we cannot, because we cannot physically do it. So this influences our decisions whether to try and imitate it or not. So for example, naay 90-year-old nga bae who struggles to walk kay tungod sa tiguang na siya. Then sa una, she always do skating on ice. She may appreciate that skill is desirable one sa una, but she will not attempt to imitate it now because she physically cannot do it. So that is a reproduction. So when we say motivation, the will to perform the behavior, the rewards and punishment that follow a behavior will be considered by the observer. If the perceived rewards outweigh the perceived costs, if there are any, then the behavior will be more likely to be imitated by the observer. So if the vicarious reinforcement is not seen to be important enough to the observer, then they will not imitate the behavior.
Critical evaluation. The social learning approach takes thought processes into account and acknowledge the role that they play in deciding if a behavior is to be imitated or not. Ang sosyal nga paagi sa pagkat-on, nag-isip sa mga proseso sa paghunahuna ug giila ang mga papel nga ilang gidula sa pagdesisyon kung ang usa ka pamatasan kinahanglan sundugon o dili. As such, SLT or social learning theory provide a more comprehensive explanation of human learning by recognizing the role of mediational processes. For example, social learning theory is able to explain many more complex social behavior, such as gender roles and moral behavior, than models of learning based on simple reinforcement. It is for this reason that Bandura modified his theory and in 1986 renamed his social learning theory, social cognitive theory, as a better description of how we learn from our social experiences. Mao kini ang hinungdan nga giusab ni Bandura ang iyang teorya ug kaniadtong 1986 giilisan ang ngalan sa iyang social learning theory o social cognitive theory, ACT. Isip usa ka mas maayo nga paghulagway kung giunsa nato pagkat-on gikan sa atong social nga kasinatian. Social learning theory is not a full explanation for all behavior. Ang teorya nga social pagkat-on dili usa kahingpit nga katan-awan sa tanan nga pamatasan. This is particularly the case when there is no apparent role model in the person's life to imitate for a given behavior. Kini mao ang particular nga kaso kung walay dayag nga sulundan sa kinabuhi sa tawo nga masundog alang sa usa ka kinaiya. The discovery of mirror neurons has lent biological support to the theory of social learning. Ang pagdiscover sa mirror neurons naghatag og biological nga suporta sa teorya sa social nga pagkat-on. Although research is in its infancy, the recent discovery of mirror neurons in primates may constitute a neurological basis for imitation. Bisan tuod, ang pagdiscover ana panukiduki anaa pa sa pagka masusun ni ini ang bag-o nga pagdiscover sa mga mirror neurons. Sa mga hayop, mahimong usa ka neurological nga basihan alang sa pagsundog. These are neurons which fire both if the animal does something itself and if it observes the action being done by another. Kini ang mga neuron nga nagdilaab kung ang hayop adunay usa ka butang sa iyang kaugalingon ug kung kini naobserbahan ang aksyon nga gihimo sa lain. And that's all. Thank you.